New legal developments on this Christmas Eve. A legal battle against special counsel Robert Mueller apparently has now reached the Supreme Court. Politico reporting an unidentified firm presented an application Saturday to Chief Justice John Roberts asking for a stay of a federal appeals court ruling that turned down the company's efforts to block a grand jury subpoena for records. Bringing Ashley Merchant on this, federal white-collar criminal defense attorney. Ashley, trying to quash subpoenas, not that unusual. Clearing entire floors of courthouses for the arguments over trying to quash subpoenas, and then making them to the Supreme Court on Christmas Eve, pretty unusual.
Definitely clearing the courthouse, clearing the entire floor, definitely unusual, and an extreme step telling us that they are very much trying to keep everything out of the public limelight, out of scrutiny. But going to the Supreme Court on Christmas Eve, going to the Supreme Court a few days before the holiday and getting a stay, that's not that unusual, because what the Supreme Court is basically saying, they're not ruling one way or another. This isn't indicative of the outcome. What they're saying is we need more time. We need everything, the status quo, to stop. We need it to stop, and we need to have a few days to look at this. And so they've given a deadline for the parties to submit their briefs. So they've got a few more days to submit their briefs, and then they'll decide whether or not they want to consider this. And the first step with the Supreme Court is going to be whether or not they even want to review the district court's ruling, whether they want to review this actual ruling. And then if they decide they want to review it, then they can get into the merits of it and determine whether or not they want to rule.
As we have learned so often trying to break down these rulings, these filings involving the Mueller investigation, it's often like looking at a white piece of paper with large black boxes on it, emphasis on large in that case. Any telltale phrases, anything that you've been able to pull out of any of these filings that strikes you that could give us some kind of insight without speculation?
Yes, definitely. When I reviewed the pleadings and the order, I actually reviewed the court's order, and then I reviewed the Supreme Court documents where they were asking for review. And what I think is telling is that this foreign corporation, what they're arguing is they're arguing that they're immune. And the reason they're saying that they are immune is that their own government's laws entitled to them to some type of protection, meaning that their own government's laws say that they are not subject to subpoena. So what that tells me is these are some type of documents, most likely financial, possibly banking, something that the government has a role in actually running this business, this corporation. So it's some type of a government-backed business, much like in America where we have the FDIC. We have a banking system, but we've also got federal government involvement in that. And you've also got some type of privacy laws. That's the other piece that I see.
Without speculating, there are countries involved as adversaries, if you will, to the United States, whose government corporate interactions are perhaps much tighter than what you suggest between the FDIC and the U.S. government. Ashley, appreciate you being with us. Thanks so much. Merry Christmas to you and yours.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
It's been more than a year and a half and to the tune of $25 million since the Mueller probe began. And still, we haven't seen any actual proof of collusion with Russia as 2018 comes to a close.
Robert Mueller could release his final findings as soon as February. So what could be in that report, and will this probe finally come to an end?
Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton has been following the investigation since the very beginning, and he joins us now to break it all down. You're a real sport coming on the day after Christmas, Tom. We appreciate it.
No, you're welcome. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. We've tried so many times to predict when this thing will wrap up. What do you think right now?
I don't think it's going to wrap up in any traditional sense of the word. Even if there's an interim report given to the acting Attorney General, the Attorney General at the time, I think it's just going to be a vehicle, continuing vehicle for enemies of the president to harass the president. And you have internal enemies of the president where you've got the deep state and the Justice Department, the FBI, et cetera. And now you've got this impeachment effort that is going to be pushed by the House. And Mueller, I think, is effectively a vehicle for impeachment fantasies of the House Democrats. And so it's just going to continue to harass the president. You know, when you look back at the past year, you've had two major indictments against Russians and Russia entities with specifically no evidence of collusion with Americans. You've got bias against the president proven that led to the firing of 2 FBI agents, or at least one, Peter Strzok. You had the removal of, you had the exposure of the FISA bias and abuse, the FISA courts being abused, the targeting of Mr. General Flynn, all sorts of activities by the special counsel that in any other period of our time, period of our history, would lead to its shutting down. And if I were the president, I would authorize and tell the Justice Department to shut it down. And if he doesn't do it through the Justice Department, he should take legal action to get it shut down, because this is just harassment at this point.
Tom, you know, it has been going on forever. And at some point, you know, people in the public get tired of hearing the same thing over and over again, that at some point they kind of start to tune it out. What do you think could be in this report, or would need to be in this report? What type of bombshell? And do you think there's a bombshell that exists that would really get people's attention?
The Mueller Special Counsel operation specializes in innuendo. And I think if they say the word Russia enough, they can somehow prove the case that the Trump campaign was in bed with Russia in an illicit or illegal way. And I just don't see anything beyond that in a report, where in prior, for instance, in the iterations of the Michael Cohen plea deals and such, you hear the word Russia broached a lot. But it's a distraction from the fundamental issue about whether or not the president or his team colluded with the Russians in an inappropriate way to steal the election. And it just hasn't happened. So what he'll say is that you had people associated with the campaign who may or may not have had ties with the Russians. And so because they had ties with the Russians, it may mean something. That's not going to be satisfying for most Americans, which, as you point out, is why most Americans have already tuned Mueller out.
Yeah. Well, what about guys like Adam Schiff that have actually basically said or insinuated that there is collusion and that they have seen it, but they weren't able to say exactly what it is? We've heard statements like that.
Still, the collusion has been between the Schiff Democrats, initially the Clintons, and the dossier authors at Fusion GPS and Russia Intelligence.
So you say Schiff is just lying?
I think Schiff is mischaracterizing the evidence, that's for sure.
Okay.
That is definitely for sure. He knows there's no collusion, and so he thinks by talking about Mueller all the time, people will think there's collusion. The fact there's a Mueller special counsel is a sign that our Justice Department is out of control and anti-Trump. It's not a sign that he's investigating anything substantive. That's the core corruption issue facing us in 2019. A special counsel investigating nothing.
But these things last forever, though, don't they? Yeah. This is an incredible investigation. It continues. Tom, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Trump versus the resistance. Now, as the Mueller witch hunt continues, there's still no evidence of any Trump-Russia collusion. So ask yourself, why was the Michael Cohen filing done on the eve of this high-stakes G20 summit? This is not the first time this has happened. Remember the Paul Manafort indictment, George Papadopoulos' guilty plea, both announced just days before the president left for a historic 12-day trip to Asia. And White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, she said today that the probe may be hurting the U.S. ties with Moscow, all suggesting that the special counsel may be trying to derail the Trump presidency in more ways than one. Joining us now with reaction, author of the bestseller, Trump's America, The Truth About Our Nation's Great Comeback, Fox News contributor and former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. You know, one of the things, you talk about the success of Trump in your book, but then you also have the warnings, what the president needs to be aware of. Obviously, I stand on my original premise. Mueller's out for blood. Mueller picked this team of Democratic donors, even Clinton's old lawyer at the foundation, Andrew Weissman and company, for a reason. He wants to hurt the president as badly as he can. That's why he's offering all these get-out-of-jail-free cards if you just say whatever we want you to say.
Look, I think we ought to quit talking about the Mueller investigation and start talking about the Mueller Trump destruction project, because it's very clear that Mueller and his left-wing lawyers are methodically doing everything they can to destroy the president, and in effect to create a non-justice department, because this is not justice, a non-justice department coup d'etat in which they undo the votes of the American people, and they pile enough junk, and that's what all this stuff is. They pile enough junk around that they just gradually overwhelm President Trump. And I think if you start and you look at everything they've been doing, and you said, you know, from day one, this was never about Russian collusion. This was never about finding the truth. This was about a methodical effort to destroy President Trump by any means necessary. And you look at some of the things they're getting indictments on. I mean, again, somebody goes and lies to the Congress. That's stupid. They deserve to be indicted. I'm not in any way defending Cohen. But they were lying about stuff that wasn't a crime. It's the point that Andy McCarthy keeps making as a former Justice Department lawyer, that none of the underlying patterns were crimes. People are allowed to be in business. People are allowed to do deals. People are allowed to do lots of stuff. And yet what you get, of course, is the headline in the elite media that somehow this is another terrible blow to Trump. What it really is further proof that Mueller's interest is in destroying the Trump presidency. And your point is exactly right. They had no reason to release this as the president goes to an important meeting in Argentina with 19 other world leaders. I mean, this is sort of like undermining America for partisan reasons.
You've been in the minority in Congress, and you were the speaker in Congress. A lot easier to be the speaker. I'm just guessing. Although you take a lot more incoming. Let's be honest. You took your fair share. So we don't have an agenda, the Democrats in the House. All they're saying, endless investigation. Nancy Pelosi's first agenda item, she announced earlier today, release Donald Trump's taxes. Now, that's not going anywhere in the Senate. Good thing the president went out to campaign very hard to keep the Senate, because that's going to help him. But it's still the intention. I don't see an agenda to serve the American people.
Well, and remember, Sean, this is what people have to understand. There's a 1923 law which allows the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee to request the tax returns of any American. So I can imagine a circumstance where the new chairman, a liberal Democrat, will exercise his legal right. The Internal Revenue Service will turn over the Trump tax returns, which are supposedly secret, and the release of which would be a felony. And then by some magic method that all of us will be shocked at, they'll turn out on page 1 of the New York Times. So I would not, I mean, these people are playing for blood. This is more like the terror in the French Revolution than it is like traditional American politics. They will do anything, break any rules, and I think break any law if it will enable them to get Donald Trump.